Hey guys, what's up? It's Emily. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute since I've done like a sit down video. Not like too long, but I've been doing more like vlog style stuff. So let's hope I remember how to do this socially, emotionally, mentally, physically. My name is Emily. I am an actor. I'm a singer. I am a filmmaker and I read and I make videos about it. Thanks for stopping by. Happy to have you here today. Today's video, as you probably know because you clicked on it, is what's it called? What am I naming this? 8 easy ways to read more books. I feel like in the past, I don't know, 2-3 years, but specifically this year, it feels like it's taking on like a totally even more extreme turn. People are getting back into reading. Reading is cool again. And reading can be hard to get into if you are not a reader currently. It's a new habit to form. It's kind of like a new way of life in a way. A lot of my time now is spent reading, where it used to be spent either scrolling on my phone, watching TV, kind of like wasting time in a lot of ways. Maybe you're a reader, but you're in a reading slump and you're just looking for some ways to kind of like get back into it. Or maybe you clicked on this video because you really want to get into reading. You want to expand your mind. You want to use your imagination more day to day. Maybe you want to get off your phone, but it's just getting into the habit of reading maybe has been hard for you. So I'm going to give you a few tips to kind of help you along the way. Reading is so fun. I won't go too into it because it's a little tangential, but like becoming a reader and finding time to read every day has really helped with depression and anxiety. Anytime I'm like, I don't know what to do with myself, like I finished my work or I am feeling anxious or like unmotivated, I just pick up a book and I start reading and I immediately feel better. It makes me use my imagination for good things instead of anxiety. Reading has just been an amazing thing for me over the past like 2 years or so since I've really gone back into it and made it a habit. And so I hope that this video can help you bring reading into your life in a way that is also mentally and emotionally beneficial for you. The first tip I have is to set aside dedicated time to read. A lot of people will be like, I'm just going to read before bed. I'm going to get in bed, get my book, and I'm going to read. And after a long day of work and cooking and cleaning and working out and like doing all this stuff, the moments I've gone into bed and I pick up my book and read, I probably read about 5 pages and fall asleep. It's fine if you do that, but like when I say set aside dedicated time to read, I would eliminate right before bed off that list because you will fall asleep. Reading makes me fall asleep so easily if I'm tired. I would find other times throughout your day to dedicate to reading. For example, when you first wake up with your morning coffee, maybe you read during lunch, maybe you read right after you're done with work. Having time set aside to read that's not just like at the end of the day when you're super burned out and you're just gonna fall asleep. And I think that the biggest challenge for me when I set aside time for reading is the impulse to check my phone. It's not dedicated phone time, it's not dedicated scroll time, it's dedicated reading time. Some people put their phone on airplane mode. I don't know why that just like makes me anxious, but I'll just put my phone in the other room. When I have the impulse to reach for it, it's like literally not there, and then I'll just keep reading. So I think distancing yourself from your phone, putting some literal physical distance between yourself and your phone when you have a book and when you've set aside that dedicated time for reading is really helpful. Reading is kind of the antithesis of scrolling. It's about focusing on one thing and letting your mind really get lost in this longitudinal, imaginative thing rather than just like scrolling and getting like the dopamine hit. When you're first starting to read especially, you're probably going to have an impulse more than ever to reach for the phone. Distance yourself from your phone. Another thing you could do to set aside dedicated time is literally put a timer on. I'm going to put my timer on for half an hour. I'm going to put my phone away. When the timer goes off, I'm done. Maybe you're feeling intimidated, like you have this whole book in front of you and you're like, oh my God, I'm just starting it. Like it feels really intimidating to look at this whole long book. Just like set the timer. It's about this half hour. It doesn't matter how many pages I read. I'm just going to read for half an hour. Sometimes the timer really helps psychologically commit to doing something. There's like an end game to it. Piggybacking off of that, step number 2 is to create a reading environment. Create a fun environment that inspires you to read. That might look different on everyone. Make it a thing. Make it an event that you're committing to. Put on a playlist that maybe is inspired by the book that you're reading, or just like a general reading playlist. Put on some smooth jazz. Like stimulate your senses. Put on like a cozy, fun robe. Get your cozy blanket. Snuggle up on the couch. Put on some essential oils that smell good. Get a cup of tea. Like really stimulate all of your senses beyond like making it an event to read, then you're starting to like train your brain to associate certain things with reading. And it just kind of helps you like get into that mindset. This music means reading. This feeling means reading. This taste means reading. I'm an actor, so maybe I'm getting a little dramatic, but the point is really like set the stage. When I'm like intentionally playing music for a book that I'm reading and I'm intentionally making a cup of tea to sip on with a book, my cozy blanket, I'm not inspired to go on my phone. If you just take a little time to set your environment to an environment that makes it not only conducive to reading, but like exciting to read, I think that will really help you psychologically commit to reading. Tip number 3 is to find places that you wouldn't normally think to read. So for example, when I'm on the subway, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go into Manhattan. It's gonna take me 45 minutes to get to the Upper West Side and then 45 minutes to get back. That's an hour and a half of time I'm not actually doing anything. So I can bring a book, I can listen to an audiobook. That's an hour and a half of time to read. Another place, maybe like the laundromat while you're waiting for your laundry. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, which I'll get into in a second, while I'm cleaning, making dinner, sometimes eating, doing stuff around the house where I can't necessarily hold a physical copy of a book, but I can listen to it. Just finding places throughout your day, in addition to that dedicated reading time, that's not dedicated reading time, but time that you can be reading, or you're doing something else. If you're driving somewhere, listening to an audiobook in the car, there's so many points throughout the day that aren't dedicated reading time that you can make time to read. I feel like these are the moments, more so than the dedicated reading time, that I really get the bulk of my reading done. You have to do all of these things anyway, so committing to reading while you're doing them, there is so much time in a day that you can also be reading a book while you're doing something else. It'll shock you. So really just like take stock of your day as you're doing activities. Ask yourself, like, can I also be reading right now? You're in the waiting room at like a doctor's office or something. Can I be reading right now? Always have a book with you. I saw this clip with Sarah Jessica Parker, and she was like, my parents always made me and my siblings leave the house with a book. We were not allowed to leave the house unless we had a book with us. I love that because you never know when you're just gonna have idle time. Like think about how many times you leave the house and you just look at your phone when you're waiting for somebody maybe, or you're waiting for the train or something. There's just so much opportunity to, instead of whipping out your phone and scrolling, to whip out a book and read. So just always have it with you. I guess that's like tip 3B, is just always have a book with you, because there are so many places to read that you wouldn't maybe normally think to read. Tip number 4, I would say, is start easy. Don't go into these like classic novels or like super dense nonfiction. Start with something that is easy and fun. For me, the two kind of types of books that got me back into reading were thrillers and then Colleen Hoover books. Those were so quick, so easy, like super page turner. Are they like impressive books to read? Not necessarily, but they really just kind of got me into the swing of things. Whether those are like rom-com books for you, fantasy books for you, even some like YA. Like I still read YA in between like denser and like more serious nonfiction or fiction books, because I need that kind of peppered in to keep up the swing of my reading. So like don't be afraid to just read a really easy, fun book, especially when you're first starting to read, or if you're getting out of a reading slump. Get yourself hooked. Get like a juicy book. Get something that like will translate more into associating reading with having a guilty pleasure than it being this thing that you want to do that's gonna like increase productivity and like checking all of the classics off your list. Make reading a guilty pleasure. Take books that are easy and juicy and fun when you're first starting off. And even when you start to get into the habit, don't just like abandon those juicy books. Like you gotta keep them in the cycle as you start peppering in some of the harder stuff too. God, if I were to just read classics and like dense nonfiction, I would hate reading. Make sure you're cycling in books that are like for you. If you don't have that, you're not gonna enjoy reading. Tip number 5 is join a book community to get you inspired to read books, whether that's following a few accounts on Bookstagram, subscribing to channels like this on BookTube, Book Talk, general social media connections to other people that read, following people on Goodreads, literally joining a book club. There's Book of the Month. Involving yourself in communities that get you inspired to read. There really is nothing like sitting down, watching a YouTube video of a reading vlog that makes me want to read more. Finding those corners of the internet that just inspire you to read, I think that's so good. And following people on Goodreads, joining the Goodreads reading challenge. You're all kind of talking about the same books. You're all reading the same books, seeing what other people think about these books that are like coming out or have been big books of the year. Like there There's really something special about the book community. Surrounding yourself with images and videos that are inspiring you to read and getting you excited to read. And not only beyond getting you excited to read, but also keeping you in the know of like what books are good. If there's like a series or a book or an author that like everyone on the internet is talking about, chances are you should give those a try and like start with those books as well. I know what books to read because I follow people on the internet that read books. Being part of a book community has so many perks. Exploring that section of the internet will do wonders for you, I promise. Number 6, I think, is to set a goal. Not only to set a goal, but set an attainable goal. The first year I got into reading, I was like, my goal is to read a book a week. And I like just made it and it was great. And that was also my goal the following year because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to read much faster than this. And then towards the end of that year, I really picked up things. So my goal this year is actually 100 and I'm ahead of that goal. But the point is, whether it's like you want to read a book a month, you want to read a book a week, you want to read 2 books a week, set an attainable goal for yourself that you can keep track of, but also that isn't going to make you feel like you're falling behind. Like if I set my goal to 150, I imagine that I would feel so behind that it might even like deter me from reading. I think it's really important to set a goal for yourself to kind of like keep yourself accountable, but also not to set a goal that you can't attain. You don't want to create a situation where reading is going to make you feel bad about yourself. You want to set yourself up for success as a reader. But I do think having goals are really important for holding yourself accountable and creating those habits. Tip number 7 is to read a variety of books, especially when you're getting started. I find that if I read too much of the same thing in a row, even if they're like easy books, like if I read like 5 rom-com books in a row, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. Like it's all the same story, like it's all the same tone, mood, vibe, plot structure. Then I need a break. I'm not going to want to read a bunch of nonfiction books in a row. I'm not going to want to read a bunch of fantasy books in a row. I did that once, like last year. I read like a bunch of different fantasy series in a row and I started to get really confused at like which world I was in. I do think it's really important to have some variety. Also for me now, I really want to make sure I'm getting into nonfiction, learning about ideas and things that are like separate from fiction, making sure I'm peppering that in every month. If I were to just sit down and be like, this year I want to read nonfiction, then just read all nonfiction, like I'm not going to want to read. So I do think having that variety, just from the standpoint of like structure, like you don't want to read books of the same structure over and over and over again. You want to spice it up, keep it interesting so that you're engaged and that like you're not like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen, because it just gets so predictable and it's not stimulating to read the same thing over and over again. Keep yourself stimulated, add some variety. And then the 8th tip, which is something that I got into fairly recently, probably within the last like half year, 6 months, is I really got into audiobooks. Audiobooks are great. As I kind of mentioned earlier, there are so many times throughout the day where I could be listening to an audiobook when I'm cleaning, making dinner, taking a shower, going on a walk somewhere, on the train, where like I can't necessarily be sitting and reading a physical book, but I could be listening to one. Audiobooks have really helped me hit my reading goals, keep the momentum in my reading, stay not only like on top of my reading, but just like involved in my reading. Reading is such an important part of my day that I want to make time for. When I can't actually sit down and read a physical copy of a book, audiobooks kind of fill my cup in that way. There's a few ways I listen to audiobooks. Right now I'm reading None of This Is True. I was doing some kind of like mindless work earlier, and so I was like, oh, I'll just like put on Spotify for audiobooks is great, and I'll literally like listen to a few chapters on audiobook and then go back to the physical copy of the book when I have time. There's some instances where I will take a book and read part of it or parts of it and then listen to parts of it. There's other times where I'm reading this physical copy of a book and I'm listening to a totally different audiobook, and I'll listen to the whole thing on audio and not even have a copy of the book. There's a few different ways to go about that, but I definitely recommend, like, if you have only really dabbled in physical copies of books, give audiobooks a try. You have visual learners, you have auditory learners, you have kinetic learners. Maybe audiobooks are like a better way for your personal brain to take in those words in that story. So definitely give that a try. Those are my 8 tips. I hope this was helpful. I hope this was inspiring to you. I will be back on Friday with another video, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below any other tips that maybe you might have. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I'll see you in the next one.